Hey guys, welcome back to the Uncommodified podcast and to another UNCORK Conversation. Today, my guest on the show is Judith Germain. Judith, thanks for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Excellent. It's going to be great. So Judith and I are going to press into this idea today. We're going to press into this idea, this question really, what is a maverick? What is a maverick, which is an interesting term we don't hear all the time, and why would I want to be one? And if I wanted to be one, how do I do it? That's what we're going to press into. Now, before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about Judith. Judith and I connected on that grand social media platform called LinkedIn. It's a great place to connect, and we've been chatting back and forth for a while. She is a tremendous thought leader. She's a consultant, trainer, mentor, speaker. She's the author of an excellent book called The Maverick Paradox, The Secret Power Behind Successful Leaders, a radio show, talk show host in the U.S., an internet radio show, which is awesome, a podcaster, and the founder of the Maverick Paradox magazine. So, Judith, what do you do in your spare time? I mean, really, you got to get a couple other jobs in there somehow. Now, the people have described Judith this way. They've described her as a mindful maverick, which is an interesting term, and I'm sure we're going to explore that today. A mindful maverick who empowers business owners, leaders, organizations to enhance their leadership capability by amplifying their impact and influence. In other words, those who listen to my podcast all the time, Judith is my kind of people. That's all I can tell you, my kind of people. And of course, this being an uncorked conversation, typically we uncork a conversation like sitting across a table having a drink with a friend with a beer or a glass of wine or a scotch. In this case, it's 8 a.m. where I am. What time is it where you are, Judith?
It's 1 o'clock.
It's 1 o'clock. So where are you in the world, by the way?
I'm in London, in the UK.
In the UK. So we got a UK-Canada connection going on here. It's 8 o'clock in the morning, so we're going to celebrate and kick this conversation off with a glass of water. So cheers to you, Judith.
Cheers to you.
Water's good. My wife says I should drink more of that. So probably you're helping me along the way. So that's a good thing. All right. So let me start the conversation this way. So the dictionary, just to give you some framework, guys, as you listen in today, the dictionary defines maverick in two ways. It defines it this way: as an independent individual who does not go along with a group or party. So an individual, an independent individual who doesn't go along with a group or party. It also defines it as an unbranded range animal. Now, for those of you, this is exciting content. We're going to encourage you to be an unbranded range animal today, like something, an animal that hasn't been branded with a brand and put a mark on them. They are unbranded. Really interesting. And in my world, I think an unbranded range animal is an uncommodified person. So that's where we're going to go with the conversation. So, Judith, let's start it off with a question. Every great conversation starts with a good question. What the heck's a maverick?
Well, I think those two definitions are okay, but being a maverick, I have my own. Okay. So I define mavericks as willfully independent. So the willfulness is not like a toddler stamping their feet, gimme, gimme, gimme. It's with a smirk, a determination. I will do this. That's what I mean by willful. They will do it because it's the right thing to do, not because someone's told them to do it.
Okay, so they have an independent mind, a will, and they apply that will most often, I would think, hopefully towards a positive outcome, although sometimes we're willful towards things that maybe aren't so positive, but this is will applied to something positive. How did you first get into this idea? Did you wake up one day and say, "Hey, I'm going to become the mindful maverick, and I'm going to write a book"? And how did you find yourself here, or were you just born a maverick? How did it work for you, Judith?
I think mavericks are. So there's two things. There's the mavericks by personality, and then there's like maverick leadership, which anyone can do. But I think with mavericks by personality, it's a reaction to circumstances. Because I think if you think about it, you're born, and as a child, you're set to please. Because if you don't please your parents, they don't feed you, right? If you don't please people around you, you get hurt. And I think something pivotal happened in that maverick state where you end up going, despite what you're saying, I'm going to do this. Despite this is how I'm going to feel, and what you say about me doesn't define who I am. And I think it's from that point that you start to move into sort of maverick tendencies. It's almost a reaction against the world. But I don't think it's a conscious decision, though. I think it happens.
Okay, interesting. So therefore, for in your journey in this, I mean, so as you sort of move in and you grow up and you begin to recognize that you have these tendencies that you later on maybe classify and label as being maverick, do you figure this out? And are you willfully independent, meaning like independent in every part of your life, including business at the beginning? Or do you find yourself, like a lot of people you work with, is this a journey that finds its way into a greater expression of being this maverick kind of individual?
I think it's a journey, and I think I think if you have a maverick personality, it starts off as an extreme maverick,
Okay.
which means it's somebody that tends to take the maverick attributes and turn them inward. So mavericks like to get what they want, right? So I want this, I'm going to have it. And they look to see how they can have it. And the easiest way to get what you want is to manipulate people and to use your will, right? That's the easiest way. It's not sustainable, it's not great, but it's the easiest way. And I think most mavericks learn very quickly that that's not comfortable and it's not right. And they move to a socialized maverick state where they're looking to the greater good and externally. And yes, the world demonstrates numbers of extreme mavericks out there. But what I'm talking about in maverick leadership is the socialized mavericks. So those who are working for the greater good. And I think it's something that you nurture.
Mm-hmm. So give me a couple of attributes. Let's talk specific now. So what are some specific attributes that you would say are attributes of a maverick? I.e., if I'm out there and I'm wondering, am I a maverick? And I'm looking across the sea of leaders I work with, or the people I encounter, or my family, what kind of things would tell me, well, that behavior probably means they tip into this idea of being a maverick? So what are some of the core attributes that you've found in the encounters and research that you've done that would describe or quantify someone as being maverick by nature or by socialization?
Well, first of all, you would have that willful intention. So
Right.
you will determine this is something that you're going to do. You would be someone who is highly influential without almost even realizing it. You're the person people look to. Even if you're not trying to stand up, they will, even if you go right back to childhood and people are trying to decide what game to play, they're like, what game are we playing? Even if you're not really there. You would be someone who is all about the successful execution. So you know how some people, if they have a great plan, that's good enough. Whereas a maverick is like, if it's not executed, then it's not worthwhile doing.
Hmm.
And they would have an honest belief. So when they do something, so if a maverick is doing something and you're not sure why they're doing it, is search for that honest belief. What do they honestly believe to be true? Because that is what's pushing them forward to do the thing that they're doing.
Interesting. Okay, so listen, guys, if you're listening in on the conversation today, just a couple of points I'm going to draw from this conversation, and hopefully maybe you'll write them down and think about it. So, one, mavericks are marked obviously by this willfulness that you've talked about. They're marked by a laser focus on doing, not just thinking. So execution. So it's not just thinking. Maverick isn't just a thinking style or an intellectual proposition, as you've experienced, Judith. It is an action. It's an orientation towards action and execution, is what I'm hearing you say. But then there's also this other piece here that comes into it, which is that they are driven by deep-seated belief that they hold about themselves, maybe others, maybe the situation. These are some of those core pillars that start to frame what being a maverick is like. Am I heading in the right
Yeah,
direction?
yes, it is. It's perfect. And I'll just add two more. One, highly justice driven.
Hmm.
But when I say justice, I don't mean therefore there's a penalty to be dished out if it's wrong. I mean equitable. Is this just?
Hmm.
Is this action just? So that's what they will definitely go for. And they will go for the greater good principle, which I define as first, do no harm. And if you need to do harm, the least amount of harm as possible. So my example would be, if you had to reorganise a company, you would look to avoid redundancies. First, do no harm. If you had to have redundancies, then you would make people redundant by treating them well, in a just way, in a compassionate, empathetic way. And that's how you would do the least amount of harm.
Hmm. So I love those are really interesting add-ons. So again, if you're tracking and making a list, so you can go check it twice and see if you're a maverick or somebody around you. That's an interesting one too. And what I also find fascinating about the conversation, Judith, is as you and I have been talking back and forth for a while on LinkedIn, and I've been doing some reading. I've had a personal epiphany in this, in that I absolutely would self-identify as a maverick. And as I think about the qualities that you're describing, I can see them as themes in my life from the very beginning. And I can see also how they can be overplayed in my life. But I've also seen how that they can be positively harnessed, like energy, right? Like these are all energy forces, and of course you can take energy and you could use it, I suppose, to power an electric chair to kill somebody, or you could use it to power lights in a city so people can see. It's the same energy.
Perfect. Yeah.
I guess this is similar like that, because I know I have energy for like justice. When you talk about justice, I have energy for justice, and I've found myself in a place of what I would say is mediating towards justice, whether it's been in social situations, community situations, community groups that I've been involved in, business, or in my own family. People would describe me as an advocate, I think, for justice. Now, it isn't always easy, and it sure has some sort of difficulty around it at times, but I can see that in me. So these are really interesting things. So again, if you're listening, these are the kind of qualities that might mark a maverick type of individual. Now, can I just purposely become a maverick? Can I grow maverick qualities? Can I put horns on a sheep, or what am I going to do here? Can I make it happen, Judith?
Yes. I mean, what I have found, and I'll talk about it more in my book, but what I find is that you have your conformists, and then what happens is something happens with the conformists that they need to make radical change. Either they've been told they're going to be sacked and need to change something, or something happens in their life. So what happens with that is that they then start to emulate socialized mavericks in their workplace. So in that workplace, you could say, oh, this person's a maverick, this person's wolf independent, they feel that stuff. But when they come home, they're back to, yes, dear, of course we'll do that, because that's what, So yes, you can. I call them maverick behaviorists, so you can behave like a maverick. But if you don't have the personality of the maverick, it's not sustainable in everything that you do.
Okay.
But what is sustainable is becoming a maverick leader, because it doesn't matter whether you have a maverick personality or not.
Okay. So you don't have to have a maverick personality to be a maverick leader, but if you're a maverick person by nature, those things are typically innate in you. You can learn them. And I would think also that if they're innate in you, that as you exercise them, you become more impassioned, more replenished. I know one of the things that I found is when I operate outside the core of who I am, it burns more energy, physical, mental, emotional energy. And the tendency towards burnout can be there, obviously, when we're operating in that. And when I'm operating my sweet spot, I feel like, and I'm in my lane, I feel I come back totally energized. My wife and I have this conversation all the time. She goes, how do you do what you do all day and you're full of energy? And I say, because it actually recharges my battery as I do it. Is there a correlationship between operating in this thing and being replenished? And how does energy, like even personal energy, factor into this?
I love it, because I've always believed that mastery is something that is not obtainable. But the idea of mastery is to continue to hone. Yeah. Okay. So I think you can continue to hone yourself. And I think there is a bit of a correlation, really, between the two. And I think it's about knowing who you are. So leadership begins with yourself. So leadership is personal, and it's personal to the leader. So everything that you bring, who you are, what you do, that's you. And what you do to the other person is personal, so you have a responsibility to be aware of that. So maverick leaders know, therefore, to lead well, they have to lead themselves well. And to lead themselves well, they need to be extremely self-aware. So Maverick leaders will spend the time to learn about themselves and to ensure that they hold themselves in every environment they are, which is why it can be deemed as troublesome talent in the workplace, because they know there's no energy for them to do X. So unless there's a really compelling reason to do it, they just won't. There is no point. So an example could be, you're in a meeting and they're coming up with a strategy and you've run it through and you know that strategy is not going to succeed in what they want the strategy to do. So you just say, this doesn't work, so I'm not going to do it. Now, a good Maverick leader would have learned how to contextualize it and said it the right way, but it's no point. It's just so from a Maverick leader's perspective, it's a complete waste of time. And that if it's not done well or contextualized, you can have problems.
Yeah, no, fair enough. You know what I'm thinking about, Judith, when you talk about this, and again, for my listeners, just so you understand, this is not a scripted conversation that Judith and I are having. We had one question to start with, and we're just having a conversation. You get to happen to listen into it. By the way, you can tune out anytime you want. Fair enough. I'm going to stick in with the conversation, but we're just brailing this out together. But as you talk, Judith, interestingly enough, what I'm thinking of too is, if I have a subset of behaviors that I know describe a maverick and I maybe self-identify, I possibly could use that list to start to look for other people who display these qualities. And as you talk about it, I think about my own daughter. And she works for a large corporation in Canada. And I think she's gotten a little bit of one of those troublesome employee labels a little bit. But she's the kind of person who, if she's in a meeting and they're having a conversation, and she's not a senior level person, I'll tell you that, but she will respectfully, but she'll be the only voice sometimes in the room saying, you know what, I'm really sorry, but I don't see how that decision accomplishes what we say we're trying to accomplish. Or, hey, you know this process change that we just made, because she works in the admin side of process in a large company. She'll say, and she did recently, they were implementing process change, and she, in a meeting with 3 levels of leaders above her and her team, was the only voice in the room saying, you know what, I'm really sorry, but this isn't going to solve the problem that we want to solve, and there's going to be such inefficiency driven into the organization that this isn't going to work. Now, her direct manager, was mortified that she would say it, but the director 3 levels up contacted her after the meeting and said, hey, you know what, you're right. And no one is saying what you're saying. And as a result of that, now she meets on a regular basis with the director 3 levels up. They have coffee together because he's interested in her maverick, I would call it now, perspective. And he's releasing and honoring it by acknowledging that actually she was right, but she had the gumption to actually speak up in the meeting. So I can see how this is even at play. Like, I have 2 maverick children, I believe.
What a surprise.
Yeah, and now my poor wife, who I would say wouldn't self-identify as a maverick, she's a maverick wrangler. She wrangles the maverick. She keeps us all in line. But I can see how this is at work in my own kids, and I can see how, you're right, how it tips into, if we're not careful, we can despise these qualities in others, but we can honor them in ourselves. Because it's not easy to manage a maverick, I assume.
No, you can only lead one.
Yeah, interesting. So that's an interesting nuance. So I can't manage one, I can lead one. What's the subtle nuance difference for you in those 2 statements?
Well, I think managers are often managers of task, and they do have some leadership, but mainly they're managing the task.
Yeah.
And the people are things to happen to make that task work. And leaders is about winning. So it's about society, you, the person, all winning, all aligning. It's about telling the story. So every maverick leader empowers other leaders, because they will not accept blind obedience. Right. So if I was a senior leader since age of 24, and I'd say, we're going to do this, and if everybody said yes, I'd be like, wait. Why? I would make them argue with me, argue the point. Why am I right? Because I wanted to make sure I'm leading them in the right way, but I also wanted them to be able to stand up and say, no, that's not right, or that's, and I think if you can lead a maverick, your leadership ability is very high. And the reason I say that is mavericks will not be led by people they don't respect. That means you need to have integrity, you need to be trustworthy, you need to be congruent, right? You need to demonstrate the idea of understanding the diversity of thought and different options. So they hold a very high standard for those who will lead them. You need to be able to deliver on what you say. Yeah. And if you're not doing something for the greater good, if a maverick doesn't trust the leader, there is nothing on earth you can make that person do. And I think also is that what I liked what you said about your daughter is that devil's advocacy. And once I figured out that maverick leaders use that ability to be the devil's advocate, not to challenge and cause problems, but as a diagnostic tool. And I help my clients to understand that so that they can contextualize it, because it's a diagnostic tool. What about this? What about that? But it can be read as a challenge. And I think for the mavericks and the maverick leaders is to contextualize that for their leads, for their bosses and people around them, so they understand, I'm doing this because I'm trying to figure out why, or I'm trying to sort this out, as opposed to I'm challenging you because I'm right and you're wrong. Because they never have that intention.
No, yeah, that's a really good point, and I really like the way that you're approaching that. So listen, as you talk, something comes to my mind, and I don't want to make a bigger deal of it than there might be, but I would assume, I look at my daughter's experience, and then I look at my son's experience in work. My proposition would be is when my son expresses his maverickness, it's seen as a positive contribution. It's seen as a great behavior. It's seen as the qualities of a leader or emerging leader. I would suggest that when my daughter expresses her quote maverickness, it isn't seen for some reason in the same context. And I'll forgive my French, but I don't know why you say French. That's what we say in Canada. Forgive my French when we're going to say a bad word, but I don't know. Sorry to the French, but you're UK, so I'm not sure you like the French anyways. I know the history. I get it. Listen, I think that it's more often than not, it's easy to label her as that troublesome employer who's a bit of a bitch. Do you think that unfortunate sort of stereotype can be applied? And if so, how does that affect this in males and females? And have you seen this at play?
Yes to all. So
okay. Yeah. So yes to all. Yes to all. Okay.
So let's unpick that. We expect, so it's only relatively recently that we would say a leader could be a female. All right. So we have hundreds of years of strong leaders all being male. And I say strong leaders with the... Yep. So, and I think that we expect men to be aggressive and to stand out. And quite often the mavericks that are doing that who are male tend to be more on the extreme side. So that's what we're accustomed to. The nuance of a socialized maverick that is working for the greater good and for themselves and others is less accepted. And the fact that your son can do it is all good to him, because there's a lot less male socialized mavericks, because they get ridiculed for this softness in their way of thinking, which is the flip side of the female. So you don't often have extreme maverick females because society will not tolerate it. So they learn very, very quickly to become socialized so that they can influence and impact. And you need to be more aware, I think, as the female socialized maverick, of the unspoken bias between whether you're assertive or you're aggressive, and to look at where the impact is and who you can influence so that you can be more subtle.
Interesting.
So yes, you can definitely see it. And I think once you've owned it, I think when you're apologetic for something, people on a subconscious basis, people pile into that.
Yeah.
and then they assume there's something wrong because you're apologetic. Whereas as soon as you own it, and I just say, you know what, my maverick nature, this isn't going to work for me. People come to me and say, I want your maverick thoughts on this. Whereas it's because I've owned it and I'm demonstrating the usefulness of it.
Wow,
and I think the other thing as well is that if you're only maverick in a very small context, like particular meetings, it seems weird. So it's a bit like, you have somebody who's horrible all the time and they're just like, oh, that's just John. And then you've got somebody, Derek, who isn't. And then one day he's really horrible. They're like, oh my gosh. And so if you just be yourself all the time and be a maverick leader in all the circumstances, then it's accepted much quicker than if you only assert yourself when you think it really, really counts.
Okay, interesting. So again, if you're listening in, own it. Don't apologize if it's you, because that's going to create a disingenuousness and an inconsistency that's palpable. Going back and speaking about the gender divide on that, again, if you're listening in, I would just encourage you, hey, just be honest with yourself. How has it been at play in your family, the way you've seen your sons and daughters? How has that been in play? And if it has been at play, maybe you need to go and acknowledge that and be honest about that with them. If you're a leader in a community group or organization or a business, ask yourself, do a gut check. Have you labeled, unfortunately, maybe the masculine expression of maverickness as good and the feminine expression of maverickness is somehow not good or bad or wrong? And how does that affect your relationships? And if it has, maybe you can own it. Maybe there's an apology that you need to make, not to yourself, but maybe there is an apology you need to make to somebody else in your organization or in your family or in your community group where you've labeled them a certain way and haven't appreciated the nature that they bring and how that actually can be harnessed for good. I'd really encourage you to be thoughtful about that after the conversation, because I can tell you in my own journey, Judith, with my daughter, I got to a point where I had to sit down and apologize to her. I had to acknowledge that I had treated certain things in her differently than I had treated them and looked at them in my son. And I had to own that and recognize that. And we had a very interesting conversation about that one time because I recognized that I didn't mean to as a father, but I had sort of parented her into this princess box that I would call it, and that wasn't fair and it wasn't helpful. Plus, it wasn't she never saw herself as a princess type of individual, and so I was pushing an identity on her that was actually causing her to have to feel squished in my box, which wasn't healthy for our relationship. I don't think it was healthy for her. And I'm learning. I'm 56 and I got a belly button and I screw up all the time and I'm learning. I figure the day I figure it all out, I'm going to die. That's sort of my propositional argument. But I can see this at play. So again, think about this deeply. Judith, this is a really fascinating conversation for me. I'd assume that when people express this sense of themselves, whether, again, it's in a socialized way or whether it's just full-blown, however it's going to look for us, there's got to be some costs along the way for to express this thing in your own personal journey or maybe other people you've worked with. Obviously this isn't just all upside. When you express this, there can be costs. So what has being a maverick cost you in your journey over the time? What have been, because it's not all roses when it comes to this, but has there been any costs along the way that you've had to pay to balance this and understand it and express it?
Yeah, two come to mind. One is in my youth, as it were, my early days in corporate life. I think I was hurt continuously because people suspected a hidden agenda that did not exist. So maverick leaders and mavericks, we don't have hidden agendas. We have no problems with conflict, so we'll just tell you as it is, right? However, if you're in an environment where other people don't play like that, when you appear to be doing a certain thing, it's seen as if you've got a hidden agenda. People are searching for that rather than taking on face value. I'll give you an example. I remember working for an organisation and the MD said to me, you know what? I don't know how you do it. And I was like, I don't really get it. I don't know how you always, get everything right and do all this. So I'm sitting there thinking, he's about to praise me in a minute. And he said, you're obviously really good at hiding your mistakes. And I was like, I don't understand. What do you mean? And he goes, well, you're obviously very good. I just can't find them. And I said to him, but don't you remember, like, if I think that I've done wrong or there's been a mistake, I'm the first to tell you. You never find out, because if I've found, I'll tell you, oh, I did this, that was wrong, but this is what I've now done. And I could have just like not said anything because you'd never know. So I'm very upfront. And he was like, yeah, but that's not normal. So we've, as a board, we've all been thinking, where's the thing that's gone wrong? And I think I was about, 26, 27 or something like that. And again, that part of it was a bias, too young to have the responsibility, only female, and all the rest of it. So that would be common in the sense that, and I speak to lots of Mavericks say the same thing. People assume there's a hidden agenda when there is none. So there's that, and also it can be really lonely. If you're you got to be really careful, because if you're the person that always brings up this is wrong, especially if you're talking to senior management, other people are very comfortable of stepping back and coming to you separately and going, by the way, Jim, this is what you need to say something. And because you are upfront and open, you assume everybody else has the same good intention. What you don't realise is that you're the one who's always set up to be in the firing. So you have to learn, when is it the right time for you to stand up for other people? And that is counter to your natural instincts. And I think that's quite difficult, because I think, especially in corporate land, you spend a long time fighting that urge to protect yourself because you really want to protect others. Yeah. But then that can be abused by a lot of people. So you have to stop. So it's a sad day when you suddenly realise, actually, I need to be careful because I'm the one in the firing line all the time. And I actually don't need to be.
Interesting. That's really insightful, and really appreciate that. And again, if you're listening, maybe you paid a cost over your time for expressing these qualities that we're talking about today. That's the price of the ride, I guess. There's always a ticket you got to pay. There's a price to go on the ride, and I guess that's the price to go on the ride. So, hey, if people wanted to find you, Judith, first of all, if they want to find your book, where would they find it? If they wanted to find your magazine or how do they connect with you if they want to connect with you and experience this idea more, maybe in your book, or even connect with you personally? How would they do that, Judith?
Okay, so the book's in Amazon. So if you type in the Maverick Paradox, then the rest of it will come up. The magazine is at themaverickparadox.com. Website, maverickparadox.co.uk. I'm all over the place. So find me on LinkedIn. My opinions often arcs. So I'm in newspapers, trade magazines. I think if you just Google the Maverick Paradox on me, you'll find me.
Okay, and if you're looking up Judith, her last name is spelled Germain. Okay, just so you know, you got that one. And I'll put that in the show notes and put some of the links in the show notes as well. So listen, first of all, Judith, thank you for the generous gift of your time today. Let's begin to sort of conclude our conversation in this way. As you and I met and talked, you have this way of expressing this idea about being a maverick. I have a different terminology that I think is very connected, this idea of uncommodified, and they sit so well together for me in this thinking. So I want to ask you, so in your world, when you think of, this, if you were to move your metaphor from maverick to uncommodified, so not being a dime a dozen kind of person, being uncommodified, standing up and standing out for all the right reasons in your world and sphere of influence. When Judith Germain is doing her thing, that's the most uncommodified thing in the room or in the world. What is it that you're doing that expresses it? Look at that! I made you sneeze and cough at the same time. That's amazing. That's amazing. You're all choked up by my question. I love it, Judith. What do you bring in that only the Judith can bring?
Only thing I have the capability of seeing the problem and the solution at the same time. So as I'm observing it or listening to someone explaining it, and they start saying things through the questioning, by the time they finish the conversation, I have got more than a nub of what the solution is likely to be. Because as they're talking, I'm already shifting and moving things. I'm really good at strategizing, innovating, executing. I think what I also bring is a very strong sense of doing what's right for the situation and for the people that are involved. So I will point that out. I bring a whole heap of fun, you know.
I like it. So when Judith's in the room, there's going to be a whole heap of fun.
Yeah,
You know what?
absolutely.
You know what? You should get a T-shirt that says, "I'm Judith. I bring a whole heap of fun." That'd be a great. That'd be a great T-shirt. You know what? I believe it, and it is fun chatting with you, and it has been fun getting to know you over the last little while, just chatting in advance even of the show. So listen. I want to give you an opportunity to challenge my listeners with one last challenge. So if you were to just be able to look them in the eye today and give them one last challenge regarding the subject matter, what would you want to challenge them to do? And that's important to me because, just listening isn't very helpful. If they listen and they tune out and never do anything and don't activate it, as you said, Mavericks are focused on execution. What's the one thing that you'd encourage them to consider doing as a result of the conversation today?
I would say have integrity in everything that you do, in every space that you are. And I'd qualify that by saying integrity is two things. It's character, so it's your character, but it's also how congruent is it between the things that you do, how integral. So if there's a Tim that's a different Tim in different spaces, then there is no Tim. Sounds a bit zen, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You have to be the same person everywhere, even if you behave differently.
Oh, powerful. So listen, guys, as you think about that, go out and get congruent. That's a really great challenge. Get congruent. Get whole. Because if you're not congruent and whole, you're right, Judith. You cannot lead others. You cannot have influence because they look through that incongruency, which becomes disingenuousness and becomes all this stuff that fights against the very thing that we want to do. It's a great challenge. Listen, as you uncork this conversation in your life, I mean, my hope in these conversations, it's a metaphor for me. When I uncork a really great bottle of whiskey, and there's this word we have in the English language. It's called imbibe. Imbibe means to ingest or to bring in. This uncork idea for me is, look, imbibe these ideas, uncork this idea, drink it in, and then breathe it out into your world. And as you do me a favor. Email me at tim@theuncommodified.com, or look me up on social media, or look Judith up on social media, and let her know how this conversation is provoking you to action, how it's calling out your inner maverick, how it's helping you understand this idea for the benefit and for the sake of others.